Welcome everyone to one half of the GLCC Season 2 Power Rankings. If you don't know, the GLCC stands for Gym Leader Challenge Circuit, a Monotype draft league hosted by myself and my co-owner Central, whose channel you can check out in the description below. Last season, we had one division with 14 coaches, and we had an excellent season. So this season, we have now expanded to two divisions, the Indigo Plateau division, as well as the Evergrande City division. I will be in charge of the Indigo Plateau division, while Central will be in charge of the Evergrande City division. So, I will be doing the Indigo Plateau power rankings and ranking the 14 teams that are in this division only. If you're curious to see the other division, you can check out Central's channel, and he will also be posting his power rankings of the Evergrande City division at the same time. So make sure to check out both of them and continue following both channels for more updates as the season progresses. Before we get into it, I want to give a few disclaimers. Firstly, these are all my opinions, so therefore take them with a grain of salt. Of course, I will have my own biases as to how I evaluate teams, as well as these rankings are really based primarily on the team composition itself and not really on the player. So they don't really have a correlation to how well any one team is going to do in the season. Additionally, I'm going to recommend some different improvements and talk about the pros and cons of each of the teams. But if you have differing opinions or if you like different teams in different ways, then you're completely entitled to your opinion. And this is just what I thought when I was going through all the teams. Now, with those disclaimers out of the way, we can now get into the power rankings for this season. So the first team that we're going to talk about at number 14 is going to be Gradient's Mono Ghost. And in terms of the actual team itself, there are obviously a few pros in that there are great breakers in Golden Go, Basque Legion, Chandelure, and they really complement the cleaners very well. Spectre and Dragapult are super fast and can really clean up endgames once their checks have been worn down or have been crippled in different ways. And so in terms of late game threats, this team definitely has a lot of them. It also has a lot of versatility just because a lot of its mons can be utility and offensive, and they can run a variety of different sets, which makes them really, really strong and hard to predict in prep. You also have a good mix of physical and special threats, and that really pressures teams on both sides to have answers, and so that's really definitely a pro of this team. However, there are also some cons, and these are the main reasons why this team was ranked number 14. The big thing that I saw is really the speed tiers. The speed tiers are just very rough, right? Because you just have Dragapult and Spectre. Dragapult's at 142, I believe, and then Spectre's at 130. And then there's a huge drop-off down to Mimikyu. Mimikyu is the next one, I believe, which is at 96. And it's just having that big of a gap is really rough, especially in this gen when you have a lot of base 100s, base 110s, base 115s, etc. And so a lot of those mons are going to be able to run non-speed boosting natures in order to, run Adamant, Jolly, Modest, things like that. Adamant, Modest, etc. Which really hurts your defensive capabilities, especially considering the prolific knockoff this gen with almost every mon getting it. It's going to be really tough to have to deal with that on top of always having to deal with damage boosting natures. The other issue I found with it is that there's a surprising lack of priority on a Ghost team, right? You just have Sableye for utility priority, and then you have like Dragapult gets Sucker, and Mimikyu gets Shadow Sneak, and that's pretty much it. I guess Bramble also gets Shadow Sneak, but a lot of times you're going to be really, really pressured for moves on this Brambleghast because Brambleghast does so much for this team. And it's not really a great thing to have Brambleghast be your main glue piece. I think the big thing is that obviously Brambleghast is the only hazard control. And in my opinion, I don't value Brambleghast as a great remover just because it doesn't have great bulk. And so a lot of times, most spin blockers, it'll lose to it. And then if it doesn't lose to the spin blockers, it usually just dies in exchange for a spin. So in my opinion, it's not really the most effective spinner just because of its low bulk stats. Additionally, Bramble is also your only hazards on a Ghost team that only has spin blockers. Plus, it has Golden Go, which is a great defog blocker. So having potentially another spiker could be nice. Obviously, it is really limited in Ghost. I'm not even sure if Ghost actually gets another spiker, but even having another rocker besides Golurk could be quite nice, just to get up rocks for mons like Spectre and Dragapult to chip things into range, so you don't have to run, Choice Band, Choice Scarf, Choice Specs every week on those mons just to try and break through threats. Additionally, there's no ground switching. I mean, Bramble is your only ground switching, and you have 3 mons weak to it, and then every other mon is grounded. So Earthquake is super free into this team. Bramble Gas does not take Earthquake's well from very strong Pokemon, and Earth Power is even more free because Bramble Gas does not have a way to deal with Earth Power since Strength Sap is its main way of weakening physical attackers. So yeah, that's a little rough. And then also you don't have coverage for weaknesses. It's basically just all on Sableye. Otherwise, Shadow Ball and Knockoff are super free into this team. So the Terra Caps do help a little bit with that, but Hisuian Zoro is not a real Terra Cap. And Mimikyu is neutral to Knock, but still gets beaten by Shadow Ball, and its Terra types don't really help with that. But yeah, in terms of potential improvements for this team, I would say Drifblim or Decidueye both provide ground resists or immunities in Drifblim's case. They have some speed control, and Decidueye has Shadow Sneak. Drifblim has Unburden, which really helps this team that doesn't have great speed control. And then you also have the option of Miss Mag, which is a 105 base speed tier. Breaks for Spectre because it has a lot of the similar checks, and it's also ground immunity with Levitate. Both of these suggestions kind of improve some of the cons that I mentioned before, so definitely something to look at for Gray. But overall, I did give this team a 6 out of 10 rating, and that kind of just tells you that there really are no bad teams this season. I think all the teams are very good, very viable, and very threatening. And so the worst rated team being 6 out of 10 should tell you that we have a really strong division this season, and it's going to be really fun watching it all play out. But yeah, with that, we're going to get into number 13, which is Bread Boy's Mono Poison team. And Bread Boy really had a rough time during draft because he kept on getting sniped on pretty much everything that he wanted to pick up, including some of Poison's best threats like Sneasler, as well as mons like Loking. So unfortunately, because of those snipes, Bread Boy's team did suffer a lot in terms of the versatility and offensive pressure. However, I still think that this team is definitely very solid. And if we're looking at some of the pros for this team, we do have great hazard setters. Glimora and Quillfish are really, really good hazard setting mons. We have great strong special breakers. Iron Moth, Gengar, Monkey all hit really, really hard, and they break for each other, which is really important, as that lets you pretty much pressure special checks very, very heavily and require opponents to really dedicate multiple mons to trying to stop that offensive momentum. Toxicroak is also just an amazing Terra Captain. I'm a big fan of Terra Toxicroak. I think Terra Toxicroak is super versatile. Terra really helps its crap defensive typing, but it also just gets a good move pool. Terra Dark, Terra Steel makes sense to me as typings. I think that Terra Captain is really, really good. You also have 2 really viable forms of hazard control, Defog Weezing and Mortal Spin Glimora, which is really good in Monotype, in which a lot of teams often don't have great hazard control. However, I will say that having to use Weezing, Defog with Glimora and Quillfish hazards does kind of suck a little bit, and being forced into Mortal Spin on Glimora does limit your hazard game a little bit, but you do still have Quillfish as a secondary hazard setter, so I don't think it's that bad overall. You do also have a great defensive backbone because it is poison, and your 2 weaknesses of Ground and Psychic are covered very well. You have multiple neutralities, a couple of immunities, and different ways to threaten those mons as well. So definitely great pros for sure for this team. However, there are some cons, of course, which is why it was ranked at number 13. We do lack a lot of momentum. There's only 3 mons with pivot: Iron Moth, Quillfish, and Monkey Dory, which this team would really appreciate pivot, just because a lot of times a lot of the mons are a little bit more passive, and you don't want to leave them in on mons that might be very threatening to it or can set up all over them. So not having momentum is a little bit tough for a team like this. We do also have a little bit janky speed tiers. There are a lot of mons that are around the same, like 60-ish speed tier, but also there's a huge gap between 106 and 86, where a lot of base hundreds can go adamant or modest instead of jolly or timid. And that also feels a little bit rough a lot of times, especially on a defensive team like this that's trying to tank hits. You really don't want those big gaps in your speed tiers that allow mons to go adamant or jolly, because then you're not able to tank hits as well. It's actually a pretty noticeable difference between an adamant Pokemon and a jolly Pokemon. But you do also only have 2 forms of priority: Toxicroak and Alolan Muck. Considering the fastest mon on the team is Iron Moth at base 110, it is a little tough. Glare Arbok does help, but it's also an Arbok, which means you have to dedicate a team slot to an Arbok instead of one of the other mons on this team, which I don't think you're really going to be able to justify most weeks. It also lacks great physical attackers, which is honestly not surprising considering Sneasler got taken. But having Slowbro, Galarian, and Toxicroak as your physical attackers with base 100 is not the greatest. It does exert a lot of special pressure, but the physical game is not up to par, I feel. Now, in terms of potential improvements, a base 90 or 100 speed tier would really help out to prevent mons from being able to go adamant or modest. They would have to respect that speed tier. And so because of that, that will really help this team tank hits a lot better and execute its game plan much easier. So something that comes to mind is Reverum, because A, it provides pivot with Parting Shot, which this team needs, as well as it's a base 90 that, causes them to have to respect that speed tier. Additionally, in terms of speed, we can also pick up Sneasel Hisui, which is really cheap. It's 6 points. And it has 115 speed just off base. And it also gets Unburdened, which is supported by Galarian Weezing with Misty Surge, if you want to go that route. Or you can just go like a, different disposable item like Focus Sash or something and try to pop your Unburden from there. But having an extra speed control option is really, really nice. And it's also a really strong physical attacker because it can get up those Swords Dances if it has a Focus Sash and if it has an Air Balloon, things like that. So I do think Sneasel Hisui is definitely a very interesting option on this team, for sure. But overall, I rated this team a 6.5 out of 10. And yeah, with that, we're going to move on to number 12. So number 12, I rated Cold as Ice, his take on Mono Electric. And really, the thing that I really liked about this team is that the speed tiers are incredible. Like you have Regieleki at 200, and then you have 130, and you have pretty much everything that you could ever want in terms of speed tier. You have a bunch of really fast Pokemon. It's going to be really hard to outspeed this team, especially with web support from Vikavolt. Unless you're running mono boots, you really are not going to be able to outpace this team. Additionally, you have Raging Bolt, Iron Hands, just some of the best 1v1 mons in the game. They're super good at trading. 1v1 can check pretty much any mon in the game if they're EV'd properly for it, and just deal huge amounts of damage, even uninvested, allowing them to invest a lot in bulk and tank hits and really be those backup answers for anything that tries to break through your defense already. You also have a lot of strong ground types, or resists for strong ground types and levitators, which is really nice for a electric team that's only weak to one move. You also have great momentum. Of course, almost every mon on this team gets Volt Switch, or I think every mon probably does get Volt Switch, and then some of these mons get U-Turn as well, which is really nice. And Electric Stab is in general very good neutrally. I mean, Bolt Beam is a thing for a reason. Electric type stab moves often hit very, very hard. However, you do have some limited priority, which I don't like a lot. Now, it is kind of tough on electric because I don't think electric gets that much priority. And Pikachu losing extreme speed does also kind of suck a little bit. But for a fast team like this, really the only way to outpace it is to set up speed. And so it would be nice to have a little bit more priority, but I don't think that's really an option for a lot of electric teams. So I don't think it's that big of a con. However, there is only one real hazard setter here in Sandy Shocks that has to set both spikes and rocks. So a lot of times you're going to be going without one of the hazards, especially considering Sandy Shocks is a bit frail. So that is going to be a little bit rough for this team that wants to really utilize its incredible momentum to continually punish switches and just keep volt switching you turning out. Having more spikes or rocks could be really, really nice for that. I also felt like the power level is just a bit low compared to many of the other teams that are rated above this. I don't think this is a fault of the team composition. I think it's just a fault of the type in general in this decks. I think it's really missing a lot of the heavy hitters. Raging Bolt and Iron Hands, while they are really good mons, they're not exactly what you'd consider like first options on a team, right? And so because of that, I do feel like Electric this gen does feel a little weaker. However, I am entirely open to being proved wrong. I do think Electric has a place. I just am not sure if it is the strongest type yet. So I am looking forward this season to see how well it does, to kind of revise my opinion. Additionally, I feel like coverage is a little lacking, right? Most of the mons only get 1 or 2 coverage moves besides their stab types, which does kind of hurt. And since you have a lot of mono electric mons on this team, that is a bit rough to get walled out by a lot of ground types or steel types or things like that. And finally, as an electric team, you would expect, it doesn't have great physical attackers. I think it's just Electivire and Pikachu, which, yeah, not really a fan of. And Iron Hands, of course. So in terms of improvements, the reason why I think Electros could be really good here is because it's first of all, it's another levitator, another ground resist, which is really nice, or ground immunity. It's also very versatile and can be physical, and I think that could be really nice to force people to respect that physical threat, especially with things like coil sets or just in general like for attacking AV. I think Eel is a very, very good mon on mono electric. Especially considering it has incredible coverage, gets like almost every coverage move, like that relevant coverage move in the game, or at least every relevant type coverage move in the game, which could be really, really nice for this team. Thundy Eye is also really good because you get prior Thunder Waves, which can help with that lack of priority, and mons that try to set up in order to outpace your team. Also, it can be physical with bulk up sets or physical acrobatic sets. Has a very respectable physical attack. I think it's like base 115. And it's also a ground immunity with its flying type. And, priority utility is just in general pretty nice. Getting off fast taunts or thunder waves or things like that it could be really nice for this team that lacks that priority. Additionally, both of these mons also get U-turn. Which, since this team is very volt switch heavy, being able to U-turn out on potential ground types trying to switch in instead of volt switch could be really, really nice for this team. But yeah, overall, I give this team a 7 out of 10. I think it is very solid. I just think that there are better teams ahead of it. But yeah, I think this probably is one of the best electric teams that you could construct in this deck, in my opinion. Now, at number 11, we do, in fact, have Korn with his Mono Bug team. And Mono Bug is kind of an interesting type. I do think that this build is very cool because it has kind of an insane hazard game. It does have 3 webs users, has multiple spikes, anti-spikes. And, I mean, it just offensively, if you look at it, Scizor, Low Kicks, Slitherwing, they all break for each other really, really well. Low Kicks and Scizor beat down fairies, which Slitherwing doesn't appreciate, and then Slitherwing can beat all the steals for Scizor. They just complement each other offensively very, very well. You also have Volcarona, Venomoth, and Ribombee, which are all very threatening Quiver Dance sweepers that continuously throw threats at the opponent and can take advantage of different Pokemon, while also forcing the opponent to have to answer them. You need to consider it in the builder in order to be able to address it in the game. So if you have to deal with both these special attacking Quiver Dance setup threats as well as the physical breakers, it just makes it really, really hard to prep for, in my opinion, when you're trying to build a team and have dedicated checks to each of these mons. And in terms of defensive presence for a bug team, honestly, it actually has pretty solid answers to different things. Iraq, Scizor, very much complement each other in terms of defensive utility. And then Fori is just a good physical wall, and Rabska can be very tanky if tear out of its awful typing. And then you also have great momentum, obviously, U-turn. You have some Volt Switch, different options like that. Obviously, keeping momentum going on an offensive team like this is really, really strong. And you have great speed tiers. There is a gap between 124 and 108, but I don't think that that's as big of a deal because it only means that mons that are at like 120 can go speed boosting or can go damage boosting instead of speed boosting, which really is not like a large subset of mons. It's maybe like 3 or 4 max. So I don't think that that's really that much of an issue. In terms of cons, I did feel like there's only one form of hazard control in this team, which is Defox Scizor, which kind of sucks with all the incredible hazards that this team can set up, as well as the fact that Bug is weak to rock, so it does really enjoy having hazard control. However, you can go boots on a lot of these mons, and it doesn't really affect them that much, and you do also have a lot of neutralities on this team to rock, so I think this is an okay con. And then you also have some lack of immediate breaking power on the special side. You have a lot of setup special threats, but you don't have great breakers on the special side to complement those cleaners. So in terms of improvements, there aren't really a large number of bug types in this dex. So I do think that you already have most of the best mons on the team already. Something to consider maybe is Heracross over something like Volbeat. Because it is a rock resist and a solid physical breaker that complements the other physical threats. And you do also have the option for Scyther, which also gets defog. And is, pretty solid, fast, strong, hits pretty hard. Definitely a solid mon for sure as well. But yeah, overall I gave this team a 7.5 out of 10. I do think it's a very solid team for Bug. Arc last season did prove that Bug is very viable. He almost made it to playoffs. He was like 1 diff point off. So I'm excited to see what Korn is able to do with this Bug team. But with that, we're going to move on to number 10. And number 10 is going to be Monotype, coached by Kaz It's My Life. So looking at the pros of this team, you do have great offense, right? Supported by Screens Grimsaw. Offense is very threatening. You do have really good hazard setters in terms of Quillfish, Hisui, Hammerot, and then Meow can also run Toxic Spikes if you really need. You do have good speed control with Grimmsnarl having that Prankster T-Wave. You have decent priority in King Gambit, which I think is really nice, as well as Hammerot being able to use Aqua Jet Sucker Punch. You do have a decent defensive core in Mandibuzz, Quill, plus Grimmsnarl / Spiritomb for the weaknesses of a dark type. And then you also have, in general, a really strong breaker on the physical side in King Gambit into Meow. I really enjoy that synergy. I think that it works really, really well, having King Gambit break down the threats for Meow to clean in the endgame. I also really like Spiritomb. As a pick, I think it makes a lot of sense because it can set up Trick Room for your King Gambit, which I think is really good. And it also gives you a fighting immunity, which you really, really need on this team as well. So, however, the cons, there is a huge speed tier gap between Meow and Hydreigon. You don't have any mons above a base 100. And that is going to hurt a lot in the builder when you're trying to outspeed things or just have threats to fast mons. You're going to be feeling that lack of speed pretty much every week. And because of that, a lot of really fast mons like 110s, 115s will be able to run attack boosting nature. And will have like very unexpected amounts of bulk and be able to live a lot of hits that they probably have no business living. So you also don't have great breakers outside of King Gambit. Crook is probably the closest thing to a breaker that you have otherwise, and I don't really respect Crook as a breaker. I think it's better as a offensive cleaner with Moxie sets, or a more defensive set with AV and just being able to be a bulky ground. I think is where Crook really shines the most. I don't think it does the breaker job as well, just mainly due to its lack of coverage, but also just its 117 attack. Very respectable, but with its speed not being able to run attack boosting late natures, you're gonna be really feeling a lack of power coming from Crook. In terms of improvements, I would just say Iron Jugulis could be really nice because of that faster speed tier. I think it's 108. Pretty sure it's 108. Instead of Hydreigon, they do pretty much the same thing, but Jugu is just faster, which I think this team will appreciate, as well as Jugu is also a fighting neutrality because of the flying typing. So I do think that will help a lot, as well as the flexibility of being able to run booster speed on it in order to have a bit more of a speed control option that doesn't require you to lock like Choice Scarf Samu. I think could be really nice as well. Overall, I did give this team a 7.5 out of 10. I do think it's very solid. I do think it's very threatening. And I'm definitely interested to see how Kaz pilots it this season. Now, at number 9, we do, in fact, have myself. I'm running Mono Rock this season. And the reason why I put it up here is because I do think the offense is really, really good on this team. We have the top 4 of Terrakion, Terra Thorns, Future Tarak, Iron Boulder. Very, very strong offensive threats. Definitely require answers from opposing teams. Send support also just works really, really well here, giving a lot of these mons bulk to live attacks that they probably shouldn't otherwise, as well as Lycanroc obviously getting that speed boost and being able to be a endgame sweeper, which is really, really important for a type that isn't the greatest at switching into stuff. Having some defensive utility in that Sandstorm is really nice. There's also really good priority. Lycanroc gets both Accelerock and Sucker Punch. Harkonine gets Extreme Speed. Very strong forms of priority, which really help for an offensive team that really breaks super, super well into opposing teams. There's also some solid neutralities to weaknesses, such as Ground Fighting, Grass Steel. There are definitely some switch-ins and ways to deal with them that really help the team be able to switch into some attacks so that it can really put on pressure offensively and get into good positioning. There's also good speed tiers. Starts at 124 and goes all the way down. The biggest gap is between 108 and 90, but that gap is not felt as much because mons like base 100s, 102s aren't able to run attack boosting natures unless they want to get outsped by the base 90, which is Arcanine, Hisui. And so the way to consider this is if there are any mons realistically that are 13 points above your lower end of your speed tier. So are there any 103 mons between 103 and 108 that can really punish not having a mon between 108 and 90? And there aren't really any mons like that, which is why I don't think this speed tier gap is as problematic. And these speed tiers are very good. Havlik plus Cole are also solid rapid spinners as hazard control, which helps this team being able to rapid spin instead of defog, since this team actually has 4 spikers and 11 rockers. Just great hazard game. And so because of that, having 2 spinners to to prevent having to defog away your own hazards is really nice. Also, Colosso can spin on special threats because it has a very respectable special defense, especially in the Sandstorm. And then Avalugg just obviously is a physical monster. So, also the offense just complements each other. You do have good breakers, you have setup sweepers. There's a lot of versatility on the team, and the Terra Caps. I really think Avalugg and Iron Thorns are great Terra Caps, in my opinion. In terms of cons, I do also see a lot of cons, of course. The team is really offensive. Even having these neutralities and switch-ins to some of its weaknesses, Rock as a typing has a lot of really common weaknesses, and so because of that, being able to switch in multiple times is really not going to happen. You really need to go hard and fast with this team in order to be able to pull out wins. Trying to play a slower or bulkier game really doesn't work with a type like this, and so that's definitely something to keep in mind while piloting it. And also kind of sucks for me personally because as a player, I know I am not a great hyper offense player. I'm definitely more of a bulky offensive balance player. So the team is going to be a little bit uncomfortable for me to build with and play with, I think. But still, I'm still interested to try it out and see how it goes. It also severely lacks momentum. There's literally no momentum. I think U-turn on Cleavor and Ogerpon, I think, gets it. And that's it. Yeah, that's all the momentum. Which on an offensive team like this that also can't switch into attacks, that's like an absolute killer. You need to make really, really good predictions. You need to make great doubles. You need to really stay on the pulse of the game to avoid being overwhelmed. Because if you get on the back foot, it's really, really hard to claw your way back up. And then there also are no special attackers on this team. Diancie and Colossal don't count. They're very pathetic excuses for special offense. So this team is very, very physical. In terms of improvements, things I was thinking about, Minior, option to provide another ground immunity, fighting resist, also is a solid setup sweeper. Can be special if you need it to be, so definitely something that I will consider later in the season. Knuckle Stack is also interesting, helps with water types, with Salt Cure, forces prep. Rhydon is also a very good Terra Rock Polish sweeper if I wanted to drop Iron Thorns or Avalog. And Regirock also is a Terramon that I very much like, and I think is quite good. But yeah, overall I gave the team 7.5 out of 10 as well, and I'm really excited to use it this season and see how well it does. With that, we're going to go to team number 8. And at number 8, we have Sir Blue with his Mono Dragon team. So in terms of pros for this team, we have great breakers on both sides, special and physical. Curum, Latios, Arc, and Dragonite just exert so much pressure on opposing teams to really find strong switch-ins, especially considering in this format, not every team has a fairy the way normal draft usually does. And so having Dragon-type spammable dragon type stabs on these incredibly strong Pokemon is going to be really, really hard to switch into. Additionally, you also have great cleaners. I mean, Como, D-Knight, Roaring Moon, really great endgame mons, and they have the breakers that they need in order to punch holes in opposing teams for them to end game, kind of win the game at the end. You also have some interesting Trick Room potential with Alolan Exeggutor setting up Trick Room, and having Dragalge also being able to abuse that Trick Room. You have a very versatile team. A lot of these mons get utility, they get setup, they get, offensive coverage. They're just really good mons in general because they are dragon types. And you have really good counterplay to your weaknesses, multiple neutralities to Fairy and Ice. We saw Central last season make it to finals with Mono Dragon, and I think that Dragon in general is really strong, but Central did struggle with Blue last season, who actually is our last season champion, who had Ice and not having great counterplay to Ice. And I think Blue really fixed that this season with his Mono Dragon team, having really good counterplay to Ice, whether that's Como or just neutralities and Arcgalon, Curum, or Eggy being able to Terra into great types to resist it. I think overall this team does deal with Fairies and Ices very solidly for a Dragon team. In terms of cons, only one form of hazard control. Defog Altaria is not the greatest hazard control in my opinion, but it is hazard control. And since you don't really have hazards on this team, it's not felt as having to use Defog. It's not as bad. You also don't have hazards, of course, because the only hazard setter is Garchomp, and Ground took that round 1, as you would expect Ground to do. So yeah, unfortunately no hazards, but you do have solid rockers in Arcgalon and Como, which both can definitely get up rocks pretty reliably. You also have a very slow team, only 2 mons above base 100, and the speed tiers aren't great, having that 110 and 95 gap, 108s, 109s, which there are actually quite a few of in this deck, can run attack boosting natures instead of Jollies, Jolly Timid. But also just having a slow team, only having 2 mons above base 100 does kind of hurt when there are so many fast offensive threats this gen. You also have only one form of priority in D-Knight. Extreme Speed D-Knight is really good, but without Terra, it is a little bit weaker. And otherwise, not having priority is a little rough. I think Como gets Vacuum Wave, but yeah, I think so. I guess I didn't really consider that during this, but I mean, still, I don't think Como Vacuum Wave is really the greatest form of priority, personally. Also, momentum is really lacking on a team like this with strong breakers. You want to keep momentum up, force out checks, and then position yourself really well. You do have U-turn on Roaring Moon, and I think that's it. Yeah, flip turn on Drew Gouge. Yeah, so it is really tough not having momentum on an offensive dragon team like this. But yeah, in terms of improvements, we do have Noivern as a suggestion. Because Noivern is a good defogger, has momentum in U-turn, and it also is very, very fast. Base 123 is really, really nice for this team. Gives it another really fast fast threat, and also just lets you have really fast utility. Having fast taunts, fast whirlwinds, I guess. I don't remember off the top of my head what utility Noivern has, but I know it does have a lot. And being able to abuse that with a really fast mon is really going to help out this team and allow the breakers to really break through more passive mons. If Noivern can get off of taunt into a U-turn, it'll really put a lot of these mons into really good position. But yeah, overall, I rated this team 8 out of 10. I think it's really good. And yeah, with that, we can move on to number 7. All right, number 7, we have Eternal. Eternal is running with Mono Ice this season. And in terms of pros for this team, I do think the offense is really, really strong, as is typical of an Ice team. But having 3 Snow Sweepers, along with strong breakers like Bax and Weavile, very threatening for other teams to have to deal with and consider in the builder. You also have very solid removal. Sandslash, Alola, Frostmoth for a Hazard Weak team. Pretty solid. I would like to see another form of hazard control, but also Ice is extremely limited in its hazard control, and not having Avalugg, because I took it, is kind of felt for this team. You also have great hazards from Frostlash and Sandslash Alola. Having the spiking capability to support an offensive team like this, very, very nice for sure. You do have solid enough speed tiers. You have very fast mons. You have 3 Snow Sweepers as well that also help with speed control. So definitely a decently fast team. And then you also have great priority, of course. Most mons have Ice Shard, and some mons like Beartic get Aqua Jet. So very, very strong priority on this team. In terms of cons, you do have a gap in speed tiers from 109 to 87. And this is a bit tough mathematically because a lot of 108 to 101 Pokemon can afford to run non-speed boosting natures, which, again, similar to Rock, Ice not being the greatest defensively, is kind of tough to have to deal with mons that get to attack boost their natures. But team also does struggle with bulky waters. Obviously, Terra Caps do help address this. Articuno getting Freeze Dry, as well as Terra Electric, and Beartic with Terra Electric, Terra Blast. Does help a lot, but honestly, this team does lack special attackers, and so a lot of mons that even get access to Freeze Dry aren't really the greatest abusers of it. They aren't super strong, so bulky waters do definitely put a halt to a lot of the offense, for sure. Of course, that is a bit alleviated in Monotype since not every team has one, but it is something to consider for sure. You also have a lack of great special attackers. Most of the good offense is physical based. This kind of ties into the previous point where Freeze Dry is not able to be abused as well because you don't really have, the strongest special attackers, with your strongest one probably being the Alola Ninetales, which, typically is a very support-oriented Pokemon and not offensive. You also just don't have great switch-ins to super effective coverage. Obviously, it's Ice team, so it doesn't really need to. But, I mean, not being able to switch into moves like fire-type moves does kind of suck in some ways because it does allow opponents to put in a lot of free coverage moves and prevent you from being able to pivot effectively in and out of your different physical offensive threats. Something I think that would really improve this team is Pilot's line, because it has great defensive presence with Thick Fat, helping out its fire type weakness, as well as Eviolite. You also get an extra rocker out of it, which this team doesn't have. It has good spikes, but Sandslash has rocks, and nothing else does. So it would really like to have a secondary rocker, which is what Avalugg usually does. But without Avalugg, I think Pilot's line does work out really well here. And having a ground type is always good. You get to block volt switches. And it also, in general, frees up Sandslash to be more sweeper oriented rather than hazard setting, which I think is very important for a team like this. But yeah, overall I gave this team a 8 out of 10 as a rating. And with that, we're going to move on to number 6. So number 6, we are going to have Shattered Backboards with a mono ground team. And honestly, Shattered kind of hit the jackpot in terms of ground rolls. I do think this is quite probably one of the best ground rolls that you can get. And yeah, I mean, before we get into these top 6, I think that these top 6 are just incredible teams. So there's not going to be really a lot of improvement suggestions I'm going to make, just because I think that these teams are probably some of the best rolls that that their typings can get. And so, yeah, I think that these teams up at the top are just very, very strong teams. But specifically for Shattered Backboards ground team, we have really good sand offense, of course, with Powdon, Excadrill, Alolan Duck Trio, but also mons like Gastrodon and things like that. Appreciate having the Sandstorm chip in order to weaken down some of the mons that they're trying to check, as well as like Garchomp and things like that. Garchomp Sandveil is banned, but having passive Sandstorm chip to really help some of these offensive threats break through teams is really, really nice, because it neutralizes things like leftovers and things like that. You also obviously have S tier hazard sending. Almost every mon gets rocks. Garchomp gets spikes. Gastro gets spikes and toxic spikes, I'm pretty sure. And you just have two of the best removers in the game. Excadrill, Great Tusk, hands down, probably some of the best removers in the entire game in this dex. You also have a really good Terra Captains, honestly. I think that Palossand is, of course, a very strong Terra Cap for ground, because it is a special attacker, which ground sorely needs. But also, Water Compaction is just a really good ability for a ground team that doesn't have the greatest water switch-ins like this one. You also have Alolan Duck Trio, which is honestly a very interesting budget sand sweeper, right? If it tears out of its awful typing, even though its defenses are kind of bad, it gets good coverage out of the Terra, which is really, really the key. The real main issue with Alolan Duck Trio is that it just doesn't have the greatest offensive coverage. It really is just its stabs and rock, which does the job sometimes, but it is nice to have the option for Terra Flying Terra Blast or Terra Fairy Terra Blast. And with Sand Force, it hits quite strong. It's also a very fast mon, good speed tier for this team, which actually is one of the cons of the team. But before I talk about that, this team also does have solid priority in Ice Shard Mammo, Sucker Punch Dougie, and technically First Impression Trapinch. I don't really respect the Trapinch that much, but it is technically an option. However, that kind of segues into our main con for this team. Speed tiers, speed in general is just rough. The only fast mon on this team is Alolan Dougie at 110. You have Garchomp at 102. And then you have a couple 80s, right? Excadrill is 80, Great Tusk is 80. And then it just like 40s. You have 40s and 50s. Like every mon on this team is really, really, really slow. And I mean, it's going to be really tough to have to take an attack every time you want to hit something. I think that is one of the main cons with the ground in general, though. I don't think that's really something you can improve on with ground. Most of its mods are really bulky and slow, so that is just something you have to deal with inherently in the type. Also, 2 of the 3 priority mons that I mentioned that help with the speed issue are lower tiers, and a lot of times they struggle to come because you want to run top 3 for sure. You want to run Tinglu a lot. You want Hippowdon Excadrill to come. You probably would need Gastrodon for a water type on the opponent team. Like, a lot of times you're going to struggle to have a reason for Trapinch or a Alolan Dugtrio to come over, stronger mons like Excadrill or Gastrodon. And I do think that they really kind of need Terra, which means you can't really Terra Palossand if you need to bring both to a game, which also is kind of tough. And also, of course, as ground, you don't have great special attackers, especially since Ursaluna Blood Moon was sniped. It's just Palossand, Gastrodon, which are definitely more bulky mons. They're not really known for their special attacking threats. They're not really known to be special attacking threats. So, but in terms of improvements, there aren't really anything I could really think of. I do think that these cons are just kind of inherent in the ground typing. The only real thing that you could maybe consider is Treads, but it's just team's already low on points. Treads is really expensive. I don't think it adds anything new that Excadrill doesn't. So, yeah, I don't really have any improvements for this team. I do think it's a really good team, and I am interested to see how Shattered plays with it this season. But I did give this team an 8.5 out of 10 at number 6. All right, now we're in the top 5. So at number 5, we are going to have Chef. And Chef was really cooking this season with this water type team. And I think that even though this water type team doesn't have rain, I think that this team is still quite good. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see how Chef plays water without rain. I do think rain in Monotype draft is a bit worse for water because it does force a playstyle that is kind of easier to prep for in terms of in the builder for opposing teams. And so I think the ideal is to have a rain mode and non-rain mode at the same time on a team, because that really forces opposing prep ideas, and you kind of have to call whether or not they're going to bring rain or not bring rain. But I am interested to see how a full non-rain team does work, especially considering in Monotype, because of the strength of rain, we did in fact nerf Pelipper heavily. It is really overpriced, and so you get a lot of points out of not picking up Pelipper and going this non-rain route. In terms of pros for this team, you have great breakers, right? Shifu Rapid, Primarina, and Volcanion, all really strong mons. They really punch holes through teams. And Greninja can exploit that with a Battle Bond, cleaning up in an endgame scenario. I think that that's just really strong synergy within the team. You also have good prio from Urshifu, Blastoise, Gren, and Bruxis's Dazzling, preventing priority moves. As much as I hate the Ugly Fish, I do think it is actually quite good on this team. And that does help to alleviate some of the pressure, considering this team is a little bit slower, which I will talk about later. But the team also has incredible momentum, right? Flip turn, U-turn, Volt Switch. Almost every mon on this team gets it. Pivoting is super easy, and given slower speed stat of a lot of the mods that you have, you're usually going to be running pivot on, it lets you get in your offensive breakers a lot easier. Volcanion won't get chipped having to switch into stuff. Urshifu can afford to run more damage boosting items. And you can get in Gren for free without having to eat a hit and not being able to bring it back in later. So I do think that that's really nice for an offensive team like this one, that has a lot of dedicated offensive threats and a lot of dedicated defensive threats. You also have really good Terra Captains. Lantern, Lapras, very useful and versatile Terra Caps, right? They can run defensive sets. Lapras can be offensive, Dragon Dance, Earthquake, whatever other buffs it got this gen. I don't remember, but I know it got a lot of them. And I don't like Ugly Fish in general, right? But I think on this team, it is really, really strong with Terra, because it provides a lot of utility. It is quite strong with Strong Jaw if it wants to, and Psychic Fangs and all of those coverage moves that it gets. I think overall it is a pretty interesting mon to see on this team. Also, speed tiers, they're a little bit jank, but they do get the job done because they're spaced exactly enough to be threatening and to have to be respected. with the speed boosting natures. So, however, that does transition kind of into the big con that I found for this team is that Gren is really the only fast mon. So you are going to have to bring a Scarf every week, I feel, in my opinion. Unless you're playing against like a slower team like Ground, which you should have a good matchup into anyways, you are going to want to bring a Scarf a lot of times. So trying to choose which mon is going to be the Scarf for each week is going to limit your flexibility a lot. Also, Urshifu Rapid is a really good water mon, but I don't really feel like it does anything unique on this team or anything really super useful. I do think that there aren't really any great physical cleaners to take advantage of the holes that it punches, or any strong physical breakers to complement it and kind of wear down the checks so that it can win in an endgame scenario. And on a slow team like this that doesn't have great fast mons, you are going to be forced into the Scarf, I think, a lot. Which also makes it harder for you to counterplay against Rocky Helmet spam, which is often the usual way to beat an Urshifu, is just to throw a Rocky Helmet on something that can eat a couple Surging Strikes and just have it kill itself. And so that's going to really suck a lot of times in a lot of matchups. Blastoise is also the only real hazard control on this team, and I think that's not great. Of course, especially with like mons like Volcanion that are weak to it, but also in general, you don't really want your mons to be getting chipped down because you have so much momentum. You're going to be switching out a lot. You're going to be forcing a lot of switches. You don't want to be having to switch into rocks every single week. And you don't also want to be running boots on a lot of these mons. You want more offensive items to boost their damage output. So I do think Blastoise being the only hazard control, it does kind of suck. For this team, especially since Blastoise is not the greatest spinner, in my opinion, because it doesn't threaten spin blockers with its low attack and special attack. And you don't get to bring Shell Smash Blastoise a lot. Since, this team is offensive, it does want to use an offensive Blastoise to kind of clean up at the end once Volcanion and Prim kind of hit different mons really hard. And so Blastoise not being able to abuse that with the Shell Smash set does kind of suck for it. I do think that Gren being your only spike setter also sucks for a team that would really appreciate the hazard chip to facilitate its offense. But Swampert is a good rocker, so there is some solid hazard potential even still. And Gren can get up spikes. I have seen very viable Gren sets with spikes, and I don't think it's a bad spiker. I just think that on this team, it probably wants to lean more towards the offensive. You also don't have great counterplay to weaknesses in Electric and Grass. Volca's only Grass neutrality Lantern is the Electric immunity, along with Swampert. But I think coverage is going to be an issue as they both don't have any reliable recovery, or all of them don't have reliable recovery, and so they will get chipped down over the course of the game, especially if you have rocks up on your side or a spike or different hazards like that. Now, in terms of improvements, what I think would make this team really, really strong is switching out Prim for Azu. And I think that this would really just improve this team so much because you have Volcanion and Protein Gren to break for Manaphy right now on the special side. Or you can use a Tail Glow Manaphy and a Volcanion to break for a Battle Bond Gren in the end game. In terms of the physical side, you are a little lacking, right? It's just the Urshifu Rapid. You can technically run physical Gren, but you don't really want to. And Blastoise is, once again, wants to be hazard control a lot, so it doesn't want to run that physical shell smashing set that it can run sometimes. Maybe I'm not respecting Blastoise enough, but I don't think it's really the best physical threat. I do think Azu, as a glue piece, to help complement Urshifu, makes this team very, very scary offensively, right? Because it's really hard to kind of prep for the raw power of Urshifu's Rapid Strike, along with the potential Banded Azu or the Belly Drum Azu. It's just really hard to check both of those mons at the same time, just because they're both incredibly strong and they both can run a variety of different sets and coverage. And in these scenarios, if you want to run non-huge power Azu with Sap Sipper, it does give you a second grass immunity, which, obviously always has to be respected. Sometimes it could cause hesitation in opponents clicking Energy Ball or Grass Knot or whatnot into different teams. So, yeah, overall, I do think the team is still really, really strong, as Water often is. I mean, it just has like a lot of insane threats that can just run away with the game if you don't prep properly for almost 6 of these mons. They will just kind of sweep you. So definitely very scary offensively, for sure. So overall, I gave this team a rating of 8.5 out of 10. And with that, we're going to go to number 4. At number 4, we have Moon with Mono Normal. In my opinion, this is probably the best Mono Normal team that you could get. Especially considering what's left on board. I do think this kind of just has everything that you would want a draft team to have. Right? You have great hazard removal, Rapid Spin Terapagos, Rapid Spin Cycle, you have Tidy Up Mouse Hold. And on a normal team where you don't have hazard potential, like you can't set up spikes. There are no normal type spike setters. You can set up rocks sometimes, but I mean, there aren't great rock setters on normal, right? It's like Blissey and Chansey, which aren't good mons, in my opinion. You don't really feel bad having to click Tidy Up and removing your own hazards because you don't have any. They're also just great physical and special attackers, right? Zoroark plus Staraptor plus Mouse Hold complement each other as physical threats. Grafaya can clean up afterwards on burden sets. And then on the special side, Ursaluna Blood Moon breaks really well for Terapagos, which can then set up an endgame sweep. Or the other way around, right? You can have Terapagos break with the 120 base power Terra Starstorm, have Ursaluna have like a calm mindset with Vacuum Wave and clean up in the endgame. You also have a lot of really insane fast mons, right? You have a mini Trick Room mode in Porygon 2 plus Blood Moon Ursaluna as well to take opponents by surprise. So not only do you have like 4 or 5 mons above base 100, you also have 2 of your mons below like 50, around the 50 base speed tier, have the ability to abuse Trick Room. So you have speed control on both ends of the spectrum, and that's going to be really threatening for a team to have to prep for potential Trick Room mode as well as a potential just fast speed mode. You also have really threatening setup sweepers. You have Mouse Hold, you have Terapagos, Zoroark. They need to be respected and you need to have checks for them, which makes opens the door for a lot of other sets and versatility on the other mons. You also have really good breakers, Blood Moon, Staraptors, Meloetta, very good breakers in general, on both physical and special side. You have good neutralities to fighting. Almost half the members are neutral to it. And considering fighting is its only weakness, that's quite strong. You also have solid momentum. You have multiple U-turn users. You have Grafaya has Parting Shot. Different ways to get in your breakers and your threats in, which is really, really nice. You also have great utility, right? Cycle is a really good utility mon. Grafaya is just an amazing utility mon. Porygon has very good utility as well. And Terapagos can run more utility-based sets if need be in the matchup. So overall, I think the pros are really, really good. In terms of cons, right, there is only one Terra Cap. Of course, that does limit some flexibility in some ways. I did, in fact, nerf Grafaya this season, so it costs 7 points to Terra, which means it can't be Terra with Grafurgraph. Perhaps that was a misplay, but Mountain Man proved last season how much of a menace that mon can be. Which is what drove me to decide to increase its price value. But team also, I mean, like I talked about before, does lack hazards, but normal doesn't have great ones. So I don't think that that's big of a con for a normal team. And it also lacks priority. Only Blood Moon has Prio Vacuum Wave, which it doesn't always want to run, since sometimes it'll want to run like Moonlight and Calm Mind or something like that. And Grafaya does have priority too, but it's utility priority and not damaging priority, which is good in some cases, but also can be bad in others. And you really need to proactively position it really well in order for it to be able to abuse that utility priority. Overall, though, I don't think that there's anything left on board that could really improve it. I think it is a really good team. There's a reason why it's ranked number 4. Something to consider, I guess, is Persian, Ambipom. They do have Fake Out over something like Porygon, which I do think I overpriced a lot. I don't think it's worth 12 points. I don't know why I priced it at that point, but potentially something like that could be a decent option. But ultimately, though, I do think that just makes the team overall a little worse. I don't think it's really that necessary. I like the Trick Room mode that Porygon 2 provides with Ursaluna Blood Moon. So, yeah. Overall, I rated this team 8.5 out of 10. And with that, we're going to be on to our top 3 for this season. So at number 3, I do have Phantom with Mono Psychic. And if you look at this team, you can tell why it's rated so highly. You have Indeedee with Psychic Terrain, plus Expanding Force, which most of the mons on this team do get Expanding Force. Being able to abuse Expanding Force in Psychic Terrain is huge. Terrain Extender on Indeedee gives you 8 turns of Psychic Terrain. And then you can just click buttons for 8 turns, click Expanding Force on whatever mon you have in until it dies, and then bring in the next one and just keep spamming it. It's really hard to switch into, especially if you don't have a Dark type, or if you don't have a Great Dark type. Kind of necessitates you bringing that, which does also hurt in some ways in which you can't bring other mons that you might want to bring instead. So it does force a lot of prep for sure. And a lot of the mons get fairy coverage anyways, so they can take down the Dark type if need be. We also have a great hazard setter in Glowking and Mew. T-Spikes really helps the Expanding Force game a lot. As well as Mew, giving Spikes plus Stealth Rock makes Expanding Force basically impossible to switch into. You really will struggle switching into this Expanding Force offense. You also have great speed tiers. Does cap at 110, which is a little bit rough. I do think that having a little bit more speed would be really nice for a team like this, but you can afford to just run Scarf Expanding Force, and it really won't hurt you that much. So I do think that speed issue is not as bad as some of the other teams. But in terms of the actual speed tiers itself, there are no obvious gaps, and it is really strong. You do have great hazard control options for Psychic, Braviary Hisui with Defog, Hatterene for Magic Bounce. Definitely some of the best options that Psychic has for hazard control. Delphox, Latios, Indeedee, Mew, and Iron Crown all synergize really well together, right? Delphox, Latios, and Indeedee can be great breakers. Mew and Iron Crown can be really good cleaners at the end game. Booster speed sets, Dragon Dance sets, whatever. And you do also have really good momentum. So Indeedee can get in really easily to reset terrain once it wears off. And you can also have Healing Wish support on Indeedee to really recycle some of the threats and allow you to continue breaking even when the team is worn down over time. Team also lacks priority. And normally I would consider this a negative, but because of Psychic Terrain spam, since this team is very dependent on the Psychic Terrain, I think it makes a lot of sense actually not to have priority, right? Because you also just don't care because you can't be affected by opposing priority. So I do think that not having that anti-synergy on this team is actually quite interestingly kind of a pro, because it lets you abuse the Psychic Terrain a lot easier. In terms of cons, I think Malamar plus Veluza just kind of feel out of place on this team. I feel like there are misplaced points. I think they could be used in a better way. I'm not a fan of Veluza at all. I think it's a really bad mon. And Malamar is only good, in my opinion, with Terra. I think without Terra, I think that just the awful typing is horrible. In terms of like trying to switch into Ghost moves or Dark moves, which I'm assuming is a tent, I don't think it switches in very well. It doesn't have great bulk. It's way too slow to really abuse the contrary superpower stuff. In general, I don't think Malamar is a good mon. But I do think those 10 points could be used for something much better to complement the rest of the team. In terms of physical threats, also Medicham is the only real one. You can have Mew be physical, but I think on this team, considering it is your only real hazard setter, I think you are going to want it to be able to spike up or rock up in most games. So I don't think that you're going to be able to run great physical Mew sets on this team. And then, like I talked about before, Latios being the fastest mon at 110 does make it lack a little bit of speed. I don't think it's that felt, once again, because priority is blocked, but it is in fact a little bit slow as a team. And the reason why it's number 3 and not higher. So, in terms of improvements, something I would consider, right, dropping Malamar plus Veluza for Azelf, right, does a couple things. Really fast, 115, right, gives you a very fast threat which I think will help with the speed tier and the team being a little bit slow. But also, it's really good physically. It actually has quite a strong physical move pool. It has great physical coverage. And it can still abuse the expanding force offense, right? Because it gets expanding force, has really strong sidekick moves. It just is really strong in general. Plus, it has good utility, keeps up with the momentum with U-turn. I think overall just is a really good fit on this team. So yeah, if you could rearrange the points to try to figure out how to fit Azelf on the team, I think that could be really good by dropping Malamar and Velusa. Now, for number 2, we do in fact have Wally with Mono Fire. And I mean, if you just look at this team, look at Sun, and look at this team, I mean, you just have insane offense. And I think that's really the big stick with these top 3 teams is that they just have out of your mind offense. If you get Sun up, Gouging Fire just hits so hard. Banded pretty much 2 KOs almost every water in the game, regardless of if it's max Fizdef. It's just an insanely strong one. And you have other really good breakers to complement it like Cinderace and Emboar, and Charizard and the Sun. So you have insane speed tiers as well. There are no gaps. Everything is covered. You have so many fast mons on this team too. I mean, Talonflame is really fast. You have Cinderace at 119. You have Infernape at 108. Like, you just don't have any holes at all in this team. You also have insane priority options, right? Even with all the speed control, you still have Sucker Punch, Cinderace, Mach Punch, and Vacuum Wave from Infernape. You have Gale Wings, Talonflame if you want, and you even can run Mach Punch on Magmortar. So just the priority options are really, really good on this team. You also have solid bulk. Even on an offensive team like this, you still have mons like Torkoal, Skaldurge. You can run a defensive gouging set in some matchups, and Talonflame can also be very defensive. So, and plus Rotom too. So in general, you have solid bulk to complement your offensive types, and all that bulk typically either has utility or momentum. Talonflame and Rotom get momentum. Gouging Fire just is Gouging Fire. Skaldurge can boost itself with Torch Song, and Talonflame gets U-turn. So you have really good complementing bulk pieces on this team. You do also cover the water and ground weaknesses pretty well with Sun and multiple Levitators / Fires, which does help. It does mean you're only weak to really Rock, which is really nice for an offensive team that has to switch in a lot onto coverage. Only being weak to Rock does kind of help a little bit. You do also have 3 forms of hazard control. On a hazard weak team, like Fire, really nice. Core Change, Rapid Spin, Defog. Very, very good. Very, very good for this team. In terms of cons, I mean, as a Fire team, you're always going to be weak to Rock. I don't think that that's like a unique element of this team. I do think that this team does have some options in Infernape, Emboar, and Cinderace being able to protein out of the Fire type, or Libero, whatever. So I don't think that this is that big of a con that you can really fix for a Fire team. I do think that the team, however, is a bit Sun reliant, and I do think that is something to keep in mind when playing it and playing against it. If you take out Torkoal, the team does lose a lot of steam. So Torkoal a lot of times is really going to be forced into boots, and if it's forced into boots, it can't run Heat Rock, which does kind of suck because this team does really want Rock, the Sun. So it's really going to be a gamble each week if Heat Rock is going to come or Boots is going to come on the Torkoal, and really that is going to limit the offense. I think that's going to be the main limiter for this offensive team. Team also doesn't have spikes, which the breakers would really appreciate, but I mean, this team also just clicks buttons. Like, it might not be necessary to waste turns setting up spikes. I think that the team honestly might have enough damage output to just overwhelm things even without hazards. So I don't think that that's that big of a deal either. And so because of that, I don't really see any improvements on board that's left that could really improve this team. I think it's a great team. That's why it's ranked number 2. And most of its weaknesses are just inherent to Fire. So yeah. So good job to Wally for crafting such a good Fire team, especially since Fire is not really typically known to be the best type in Monotype. But yeah, at number 1, that leaves us with what I consider to be the best team in the Indigo Plateau division. On paper, of course, not considering the team coaches at all and their skill level or any other factors, just on paper, thinking about the pros and cons of each of these teams, what I think the best team is. And this season, it is Trayon with Mono Fighting. I think this team is just insane. Just has ascended offense. Like, who let him cook like this? I don't know. Valiant, Sneasler, Keldeo, Conkeldor, just batshit insane. Like, not even considering the rest of the glue pieces, that, like, those top 4 are just insanely hard to switch into. You just really struggle trying to figure out how to, combat all of these different physical and special threats together, and trying to find really good consistent checks to them is just kind of impossible. It's really just going to be, can you offense this team? And we saw last season with Blue's Ice team how well that works. Just having insanely offensive potential and being able to out-offense pretty much every other team, and forcing other teams to have to run more offensive playstyles that they're not built for. It's just really strong as a playstyle, in Monotype especially, where a lot of teams struggle to find checks for different threats. So I do think that Trey has a very great team, very reminiscent of Blue's Ice team last season that did win the league. So definitely something to watch out for. Also, some of the best Terra captains on the board, in my opinion. Terra Scrafty, Terra Primate, very good Terra captains. Terra Scrafty is just so versatile, right? You can run Intimidate sets, you can run Moxie sets, you can run Shedskin Rest sets. Like, it's just super versatile. With the Terra, you can get out of its awful typing, and it just has great coverage now with that Terra, with the Terra Blast, and it allows you to run different sets like Dragon Dance, if you really want to go more offensive. But also, you can abuse its crazy bulk, stall out different bonds, bulk up sets, different sets like that. So very versatile mon, and really hard to prep for. You also have Primate as a mini Annihilate, being able to disable Terra Ghost and boost Rage Fist, as well as have a better defensive typing, so you can eat more hits and boost that Rage Fist output, is really good as a secondary Terra captain, for sure. You also have really good prio, right? It's a fighting team. You have strong Mach Punches. Hitmontop gets Bull Punch as well. So, I mean, typical fighting team stuff. You have a good diversity of offensive roles, which is really important when your team is really offensive. You have a lot of breakers and cleaners, but you also have setup sweepers that need to be respected and need to be teched for. Speed tiers are incredible. Once again, you have speed that goes from 120 to 43, no real gaps in there that will come back to bite you, as well as you have really fast mons above base 100, have some good mid-tier mons, and you even have good Trick Room abusers if you really want. And your opponent decides, trying to use Trick Room as a strategy to get around these really fast threats like Valiant, Sneasler. Crab, as much as I don't like Crab, it is a good Trick Room mon. But you just have slower mons like Conk, Hitmontop. Scrafty is pretty slow. Like, definitely have some good Trick Room abusers if that is the strategy to try to get around Unburden Sneasler. You also have solid removal. On an offensive team like this, right, you don't really want to lose momentum getting up rapid spins or defogging. So mons like Conk and rapid spin Hitmontop that can remove while also threatening things out is really nice for a team like this. I think it is a really strong removal for this team. In terms of cons, inherently having such an offensive team, you are going to have some trouble switching into weakness coverage like Psychic and Flying moves, especially considering how common those moves are. Obviously, controlling the pace of the game, making aggressive drop doubles to position advantageously, and force progress is going to be really important for this team to win games. We really need to be aggressive, find good positioning, and try not to get on the back foot, because once you are, it's going to be a little bit tough to try and claw yourself back into the game. So overall, I mean, this team is number 1 for a reason. I think this team is just super scary to play against. I don't really think that there's anything that this team struggles with. And I think that team, the only weakness that this team has is really one that's inherent to fighting, just being such an offensive type in general. So I don't really think that there's anything that can be done to improve it. I think you really just have to watch out for this team when you're playing against it. But yeah, with that, that does in fact conclude our power rankings for Indigo Plateau. So thank you for watching, everyone. We're really excited to have a great season this for our second season ever. And make sure to check out my co-owner Central's channel in the description as well. If you want to see the power rankings for the other division, Evergrande City, there are some great teams there as well. So make sure that you go and check that out to see the other half of the teams that will be playing this division this season. Also, if you're ever interested in checking out these the battles for the season in real time, or want to join for future seasons, the Discord link is in the description as well. So make sure to join that as well. But yeah, thank you guys again for watching, and hope you enjoyed the PRs.